The thing had killed 211 knights before it got to me. That is not a figure of speech. There was a list. The council kept it in a ledger with a green cover, and a clerk added to it every evening by lamplight, and by the 11th day the clerk had started leaving the column for the cause of death blank. There was no point writing the same word 200 times. I was 39 years old. I had slept 4 hours in 3 days. I remember the cold more than the fear. It came up out of the cut in the ground the way water comes up a well shaft. No noise. That was the part nobody who survived could explain to anyone who hadn't seen it. A thing that size should make a sound, and it made none, and the silence went out ahead of it like a smell. It was 4 stories of dark, not black, dark the way a river is dark with something moving underneath. Where its ribs should have been there was a knot of white light, tangled and slow, turning over on itself. I could see the knot. Nobody else could. Behind me, a very large man was laughing. He always laughed when it got bad. It was the single most irritating habit of any man I have ever loved. The men said, Ansel, Ansel, look at the size of it. Kestrel said, I see it. The men said, no, but look at it. On my other side, a quieter man was not laughing. He had a gold pin on his coat and both hands on his sword, and he was doing the arithmetic, because he always did the arithmetic, and he had already got the answer. A pike said, we can't, Ansel, we cannot, there's 3 of us. He was right, 3 of us, and 211 names in a green ledger, and a town 9 miles behind us that had not finished leaving. I want to be honest about what I did next, because I have had 40 years to be dishonest about it, and I used most of them. I did not charge it. Charging things is for the young and the well-rested. I stood still and I let it come. That is the whole art, and I have never been able to teach it to anyone in a way that stuck. Everything alive leaks. A man leaks, a horse leaks. A thing 4 stories tall made of nothing but power leaks like a split cask, and all that power goes out into the air and hangs there, and everybody in the world has been standing in it for 200 years without once putting out a hand. I put out a hand. The air came into me and I did not keep any of it. That is the second half of the art, and it is the half that kills people. You do not hold it. You are a pipe, not a bucket. It comes in cold at the wrist and goes out hot at the edge, and if you try to keep even a mouthful of it for later, you will die with your teeth clenched. The thing reached the broken ground where I had chosen to be standing. It had no face to speak of. It leaned down anyway, and I cut the knot under its ribs. 1 cut, 6 inches long. It went in exactly as far as it needed to, and not 1 hair further. Because a longer cut is a slower cut, and slow is how the other 211 had gone. The dark came apart like a wet paper sack. I sat down, not gracefully. My leg stopped taking instructions, and I went down on the stone with my sword still in my hand, and Fen was shouting something joyful and obscene, and Pike was already looking north at the cut in the ground, because Pike always looked at the next thing. The cut in the ground was still open. That was the part we did not put in the report. That was 40 years ago, and tonight I was 79 years old, and I was dying in a rented room above a wine shop on Carter Street. I want to be clear that this was my own fault and not a tragedy. I had money. I had rather a lot of it at various times. I gave most of it away in a manner that felt generous at the time and looks, from the ceiling, a great deal like laziness. The room had a bed, a chair, a stove I had not lit in 2 days, and a sword against the wall. Plain grip, plain guard, no maker's mark. I had turned down 11 swords worth more than this building and kept the one I could sharpen without thinking about it. Someone had talked. That was the only explanation for the bells. They started at the cathedral and they went across the whole capital, quarter by quarter, the way they do for a fire or a flood or a very great man, and by the time they reached the river there were people in the street under my window in the rain. I could hear them, not weeping, just standing. 11,000 people, I found out later in the rain, for a man who was upstairs alone with a cold stove. So I lay there and I did what men do at the end, which is not thinking about God and not thinking about your enemies. It is a list. Everyone gets a list. Mine had a woman on it first. Her name was Vera, and I had asked her to wait until after the next contract. I did that when I was 34. I did it again at 40. I did it at 51, and by then it had stopped being a thing I asked and started being a thing we both said, like a joke that had gone on so long nobody could remember whether it was funny. She stopped waiting somewhere in there. She never told me when. That was kind of her and I did not deserve it. Second on the list was the work. I could do something nobody else could do. I had known that since I was 26. I told myself every single year that I would write it down. 60 years of that. 60 years of next winter when things are quiet and things were never quiet, and now the whole of it was lying in a rented bed with the rest of me and it was going in the ground on Thursday. Third was a boy called Gray. I took him at 17. He was the best I ever saw. At 19, at the breach, he did a thing to buy us 4 hours and the thing worked and it was unforgivable and I broke his sword over my knee in front of the whole line and told him to get out of my sight. I have thought about it perhaps 4,000 times. I still think I was right. I have never once thought I did it correctly. I never took another student, and fourth at the bottom, the one nobody in the world knew about. I did not kill the thing that came out of the breach. You cannot kill it. I have tried more ways than anyone alive. It does not have a life in it to end. What I did was seal it 40 years ago with the only anchor I had to hand at the time, which was me, my blood, my name, my years. I told the council it was dead because the empire needed it to be dead and because I was 39 and famous and it was easier. The seal holds 3 years past my death, not 4, not 10. 3 because that is the term I set standing in the dark with 9 minutes and a bad idea. I worked it out on the ceiling the way I have worked out every problem in my life. Days to the seal 1095 days from the moment I stopped. I lay there and I put the numbers together. Every night in the empire, every guild demonstration in every stadium, every core traded in every market. All of it feeding the thing under the north a little more each year, because that is what it eats, and the empire has been getting stronger and richer and louder for 40 years, and nobody has ever once been told. I needed 20 years in a school and about 200 people. I had a bed and a bad heart. Here is the last honest thing. I was not afraid at the end. I was ashamed. There is a difference, and I had never bothered to learn it until it was the only thing in the room with me. The bells went on. I remember thinking that the rain would flatten the flowers and that somebody ought to tell them to go home. 2 streets east at the Crown Academy, a boy was sitting at a desk. I did not know that then. I know it now, and I have gone over what I know of that hour more carefully than I have ever gone over anything, so I am going to say only what I am certain of. The room was on the 3rd floor of the north dormitory at the end next to the stair. It was cold because the 3rd floor is where they put the students whose families have stopped paying attention. On the desk there was a letter. It had come that morning by house courier on good paper. It was 4 lines long. It had 2 signatures on it. Next to the letter there was a notebook. Cheap board covers, 4 years of daily entries, the same 3 exercises written out every single day. He closed the notebook and squared it to the edge of the desk. He was careful about that. He had been careful about it for 4 years. Then he pushed the chair in. That is all I am going to say about it now or ever. It is not mine to describe. I have heard people describe it since in corridors in the way people do when a thing is interesting to them because it did not happen to them, and every time I have made a point of remembering their faces. He was 18 years old. His name was Silas Corvin. He was measured at 0 on the day he turned 18, and his family sent 1 letter about it, and he was in the ground before the newspapers had finished printing my obituary. The bells were still going for me when he did it. Nobody rang anything for him. I woke up on a floor. That was the first fact, and it took a long time to get through because I had been fairly sure there would not be a second fact. Boards under my cheek. Cold. A smell of chalk dust and old wool. I have woken up on floors before. You do not spend 60 years in this trade and get to be precious about furniture. So I did what I have always done, which is to work out where the room is, where the door is, and where my sword is in that order before opening my eyes. Then I opened them and the floor was 3 inches from my face, and I could see the grain of the board and the small brass tack head in it, sharp and clear with no blur at all. I had not seen anything at 3 inches without help since I was 52. I put a hand flat on the boards to push myself up. It was not my hand. I want to be careful here because this is the part that people always want to be dramatic, and it was not dramatic. It was a small hand. Thin fingers, bitten nails, ink on the side of the middle finger where a pen sits. A plain linen bandage around the left wrist, wound neatly, tied off the way you tie one when you are doing it yourself with your teeth. I looked at it for a while, then I tried to stand and I found out what I actually was. There was nothing in me, no strength anywhere. It was not the emptiness of being old, which I knew intimately and which is a kind of tiredness that sits in the joints and can be argued with. This was different. It was the emptiness of a house with the furniture taken out. I got as far as my knees and had to stop. My arms shook. My heart was going far too fast for the effort involved. Somewhere behind my eyes there was a high thin ache, and I recognized it because I had felt it once before in a boy who fainted at his own measuring at 13. I got up on the third attempt using the bed frame like a man of 90. The room told me most of it before I found a mirror. It was a student's room and a poor one. Bed, desk, chair, a press for clothes, no rug. The stove was cold and had been cold long enough for the metal to smell of nothing at all. There was a window, and the window was open, and the rain was coming in on the sill and had been for hours. On the hook behind the door there was a coat, white, good-cut Academy issue. The collar was blank. I stood and looked at that for longer than anything else in the room. Every night house in the empire puts its colors on the collar of a boy's coat and pays for the privilege. This one had been unpicked. Not cut, not torn, unpicked stitch by stitch carefully by somebody who did not want to damage the coat. Then I found the letter on the desk, and it took me 11 seconds to read, and it explained the coat, 4 lines, good paper. It regretted that the house could no longer support a member who could not be expected to contribute to its standing. It confirmed that the allowance had been discontinued as of that date. It wished him well. It was signed by his father. Underneath, in a different hand, faster and larger, it was countersigned by his brother. I put it down. Then I picked it up again and read the date, and the date was yesterday. Next to it was the notebook. I did not open it. I want that on the record. I stood there with my hand on the cover for a while, and I did not open it because I had already worked out most of what had happened in this room, and I did not think I had earned it yet. Instead, I said the only thing I have ever said out loud about it. Kestrel said, "I'm sorry. I wasn't here, and I don't know you, and I've got no right to be standing up in your room." The rain came in on the sill. Kestrel said, "I'll settle it. I don't know how yet." That is all, no speeches. I have never been able to talk to the dead, and I did not start at 79. There was a shaving glass on the press the size of a hand, 18, thin the way you get thin when you have quietly stopped eating properly and nobody at your table has noticed. Black hair a little too long, cut cheaply. Gray eyes with dark rings under them. It was a good face. That was the thing that got me. It was a perfectly good, ordinary, decent face, and I have seen 400 boys with that face come through a guild door at 18 wanting to be knights, and about 6 of them were worth anything, and this one had never been given the chance to find out which. I looked at the reflection, and the reflection had my stillness in it. I could see it. The face was his and the way it sat was mine, and the two things did not agree, and they were never going to. Then I looked at my own hand again, properly, the way I look at a fighter, and the numbers were there. I need to explain this, and I will do it once and plainly because it is the only strange thing about me, and everything else in this account is ordinary. I have always been able to see how a man's power moves, not as a picture, as a feel, the way a farrier feels a limp before he sees it. It took me 30 years to get good at it, and it was the reason I was better than people who were stronger than me. Whatever happened when I died burned that feel into the front of my eyes and turned it into figures. I have never asked where they come from. I asked once early and got no answer, and I have too much to do. So I looked at my own hand, and the Empire's own units came up in front of it in the Empire's own words and told me what I was. Silas Corvin, 3rd year, Crown Academy, Depth 0, Hollow Ladder 312/312 0. Not low, not weak. 0, which is a thing that happens to about one person in 40,000, and which the Empire has a form for and a pension and a job sweeping something. I stood in a cold room in a dead boy's body, and I reached for my aura the way I have reached for it every morning of my adult life. It is like reaching for a coat on a hook without looking. You do not think about it. It is simply there and your hand knows where. There was no hook. There was no coat, no wall, no room. I reached 3 more times because I am a stubborn man, and on the 4th I understood that I was going to have to stop. I laughed, once out loud in an empty room, and it came out of an 18-year-old's throat and sounded wrong. 60 years, 3 continents. A guild with my name on the charter. 211 names in a green ledger, and I was the man who ended the list. And I had been handed the one body in the Empire that could not hold a single drop. I stopped laughing fairly quickly, because I was already even then standing in that room working out the other half of it. That is not courage. It is a habit, and it is not always a good one. A better man would have sat down on that bed for an hour and thought about the boy. The other half was this: everybody leaks. I had spent my whole life on that fact. Every night in this building was, at that exact moment, dumping 9/10 of everything he owned into the air, and had been since he was 12 and would be until he died. I could not hold anything. But a pipe does not hold anything either. I was still standing there with my hand out in front of me when somebody came up the stairs at speed and hit the door twice with the flat of his hand. A porter said, "Corvin, do's office. Today, not tomorrow." The footsteps going away, he had not waited for an answer. I do not think he had expected the room to be occupied. I looked around it once more. The tin on the desk had 3 crowns in it. 3 crowns is 2 days of meals if you skip one a day. Kestrel said, "Right." I said, and I went to find out what the boy's life was. The Crown Academy is the most beautiful building in the Empire, and I have always disliked it. White stone, 4 stories, a courtyard you could march a company in, and a colonnade down the east side that cost more than the town I grew up in. It was built 90 years ago as a barracks. The barracks part is still in there somewhere under the marble, the way a plain woman is still in a portrait of a duchess. 312 students. That number does not change. When one leaves, the place is filled by the end of the month, and there is a waiting list 400 names long of families who would sell property to get on it. I came down the north stair into all of it at 7:30 in the morning, in a coat with a blank collar in a body that had to hold the rail. There were 4 banners hanging in the entrance hall. I stopped when I saw them, which was a mistake because a boy walked into the back of me and swore. They were guild banners. Big ones floor to ceiling hung for visitors. A hammer, a thorn, an open eye, and a lantern. Someone had cleaned the hall for the scouts. There were men in good coats standing under the banners with notebooks, watching 2nd and 3rd years go past, and every student in that hall knew exactly who they were and was walking slightly differently because of it. I should explain the whole business quickly because everything that happens to me from here runs on it. Monsters come out of a hole in the world 400 miles northeast of here. They have been coming out for 40 years. Ordinary steel will not do much to one because a monster is not made of meat. It is made of power wearing a shape. You need power on the edge of your blade to cut it, and that means you need an aura knight, and that is why aura knights run this empire and know it. Kill one and it falls in on itself and leaves a core. A hard, warm lump about the size of a fist. You sell it. The core trade is the largest business in the empire, and there are men in this capital who have never held a sword and have got rich on it. The knights are organized into guilds, 4 big ones and about 40 small. The 4 big ones are on those banners, and the guild scouts under them are shopping, and every student in this building is merchandise and knows it and has known it since they were 12. At the end of 3rd year, there is the draft, not an exam. The stage, a crowd, seats sold, newspapers, and the 4 great guilds calling out names in order until the good ones are gone. What happens to you on that day decides the next 40 years of your life. Everything at the Crown Academy points at it. The lessons point at it. The friendships point at it. The bullying points at it. And in the middle of the entrance hall, where you cannot miss it, is the ladder. It is a brass board 11 feet high with 312 names on it in slots so they can be moved. It is polished every morning. Your name goes up or down by 2 things only: duels and hunt returns, the cores you bring back weighted by grade. I found my name. It was at the bottom, which I expected. What I had not expected was that it was in a different typeface from the others. I stood and worked that out. It took a moment. The board is set in one style and the last line is set in another, slightly narrower, so that the eye goes to it and knows before it reads. Later I asked what it was called, and a second year told me cheerfully, without any malice at all, that it was the courtesy line. A hollow cannot hold a rank because rank means fighting and a hollow cannot fight. But the school will not leave a student off the board. That would be unkind. So they put you at the bottom in a different letter, and everybody who walks past learns to read it in half a second every day for 3 years. The ladder is the loud rank. It moves every week and the students argue about it constantly. There is a second one and it is quieter and it decides everything. It is called the standing and it is set once a year at the trials. The trials are 8 days at the end of the academic year and they are a public ceremony. Families travel for them. Seats are sold on the North Terrace. The results are read aloud off the hall steps and the top 10 names are in every newspaper in the capital the next morning. 4 parts, 500 points. The course is the body, a day of it. Load carry, climbing, endurance, and blade drill at the end when you are too tired to lift your arms, 100 points. The papers are the head: monster lore, ground survey, contract law, field medicine, guild history, written and oral, 100 points. The ground is survival. 5 days in a live hunting ground in teams of 6 with the kit you can carry. You are scored on what you bring out and on whether your team comes out with you, 100 points, and the stone is aura, measured depth then controlled output. Cutting graded plate, holding a load, striking to a set figure. The stone is worth 200. That is the Empire's entire opinion of people, written down as arithmetic and handed to children. Nobody has ever queried it because it has been that way since before any of these instructors were born. What the number buys is not abstract. The top 10 are cut into a stone plaque in the hall. They get private chambers instead of a dormitory, first pick of instructors, seats at the guild dinners, their own hunt permits, and the right to refuse a duel without forfeit. The top 50 get an early license and they may lead a team and they are allowed into the deep grounds. The bottom 50 get corridor duty, kitchen duty, no hunt permit unless an instructor is standing over them, and the demonstration roster. That last one is a real list on a real board, and it is why a 19-stone boy from the border spends his mornings being knocked down 11 times for 4 crowns a month. I stood at that board and did the sum for the body I was standing in. Course, papers, ground, 300 points a man can work for. Stone 200 and a hollow scores nothing on it, not a low mark. Nothing before the first day starts. Perfect in everything else, and the best you can ever be is 300 out of 500. I have been given some difficult arithmetic in my life. That is the first sum I was ever handed that had an insult built into it. There were 2 guild men at the board while I was standing there. Lantern, white and gold, good boots, notebooks out. One of them was about 40 and doing the talking. The other was younger and doing the writing, and he wrote fast, and he did not look up once. They were working from the top down, which is what scouts do, and they were doing it out loud because it did not occur to either of them that anybody at that board mattered enough to overhear. A 14, Ember. We won't get him. The Flame have had him promised to the Hammer since he was 12. Write him anyways. They went down the board like that, number by number. A boy at 29 was nice hands, no chest. A girl at 36 was fathers in shipping, take her, will never pay for the barge license again. At 41 they stopped. A scout said, who's larking? A scholarship. The depth. A 380. The pause about a second and a half long. Then the pencil moved on. A scout said, ceiling's the ceiling, next. Ceiling's the ceiling. I stood at that board with a rag in my hand, and I heard a man in my own guild's coat say those 3 words about an 18-year-old girl, and it went into me a long way further than anything anybody said to my face that week. Because he is not wrong under the method they teach. She is 380 and she is finished, and he has 30 years of numbers behind him that say so, and I am the reason nobody in that hall knows any different. They got to the bottom of the board eventually, the way you get to the bottom of anything. A scout said there's a Corvin down here. Where? Bottom's last lines. The older one leaned in and looked at the different letters and made a small noise, and then he actually laughed. Not cruelly. It was the laugh you give a printing error. The scout said that's the one. There was a thing about it a couple of years back. Do I write him? Write what downs? They moved off towards the colonnade, still talking, and neither of them had looked at the boy standing 4 feet away holding a wet rag. I want to be exact one last time about who they were. They were not bullies. They were 2 working men doing a difficult job well on behalf of a guild I built using a system I let happen. There was one other person at the board. She was tall, about 18, ash-blonde hair cut at the jaw, in a gray-green coat with the open eye of the watch on the shoulder. Her coat was 3 years old. The sword on her hip was worth more than everything else she was wearing put together, and it was old, and it had been re-gripped at least twice. She had been standing there the whole time the scouts were talking. She did not look at them, and she did not look at the board. She looked at the colonnade where they had gone with an expression of very calm dislike, and then she turned and looked at me, not at the collar. That was the thing. Everybody in that building looked at the collar first, and most of them never got past it. She looked at my hands. Then she went off down the east corridor without a word, and I filed her, and it was another 11 days before I found out that her name was Issa Holt, and that her house had not been able to afford an instructor for 2 years. I got about 40 feet across the hall before the building told me what the boy's life had been. A porter came out of a side door with a bucket in one hand and a rag in the other, and he put the rag against my chest without breaking stride and without looking at my face. East corridor before the scouts get down there. I took the rag, he was already gone. I want to be exact about this because it matters more than any insult in this episode. He was not cruel, he was not even rude. He handed a rag to the hollow the way you would hand a rag to a mop stand. He had done it 100 times and it had never once occurred to him that there was anybody in there to be handed anything. Two boys went past me on the stairs and one moved sideways to avoid touching my sleeve. Not a shove. A small polite sidestep, the kind you do around a wet patch. A girl I did not know saw the blank collar and then very deliberately looked at the window and kept looking at the window until I was past. I have been ignored before. Everybody has. This was not that. This was a building in which a person had been converted by unanimous agreement and without a single act of violence into a piece of furniture. It took the boy 5 years, I think. Measured at 8, again at 13. Sent here anyway because a Corvin who was not at the Crown Academy would have been an admission, and this family does not make admissions. They bought him a seat at the best school in the world so that nobody would ask a question, and then everybody in it stopped seeing him, and he wrote in a notebook every day for 4 years. I was still holding the rag when I found the yard, and the yard is where I stopped thinking about any of that, because the yard is where I saw what they were doing to the aura. 50 students in the sun, 3rd year, wooden blades and set forms and an instructor calling the count, and every single one of them was on fire. I need to be plain because this is the whole of it and I will say it once. When a knight uses aura, only a little of it gets to the blade. The rest comes out of the body and goes into the air. You cannot see it. Nobody can see it. It hangs there for a few seconds like dust in a sunbeam and then it is gone into nothing. And it has been happening in every training yard in the Empire every day for 200 years. I could see it now. The yard was thick with it. It came off their shoulders and their backs and their hips in slow pale motes and it drifted and the sun came through it. And 50 rich children with the best instruction money can buy were throwing away more power in one morning drill than a border town uses in a year. I stood at the rail with a rag in my hand and looked at the numbers over their heads. 3rd year morning drill, 50 students depth range 210, 780 yield range 4%, 9% every boy in that yard was measured for how much he could hold. Nobody had ever measured how much of it got to the blade. I had spent 60 years on that question. They had spent none. That is not their fault, and I want that on the record too. It is mine, I knew. I have known since I was 26, and I did not write it down, and here it was exactly as I left it. The demonstration started at 9, and that is where I first saw Bo Tanner. They needed a live target. That is standard. You cannot teach a boy to strike properly against a post because a post does not move and does not brace, and there is a difference between hitting a thing and hitting a man. So the academy pays a student to be hit. He was the largest human being in the courtyard. 19 stone of border farm boy, a head taller than anyone else there, with cropped sandy hair and a uniform that had given up trying. His hands were wrapped in cheap tape. He stood in the middle of the ring and set his feet and braced, and the instructor called the names of 6 students in turn, and each of them hit him with everything they had. He went down 11 times. I counted. He got up 11 times, and the 11th time he thanked the instructor. I looked at him and the figures came up and I had to hold the rail. Bo Tanner 3rd year, no house depth 430 iron yield 4% leak both hips on the brace 430. There were boys in that yard from families with rivers named after them who were carrying half of that. This one had come down out of a border town where they measure children in a barn, and he had been handed the 2nd largest reserve in the year, and they had made him a crash mat. 4 crowns a month, I found out later. That is what it pays. A month of a border family's rent. He was leaking almost all of it, not through bad character, through his hips on the brace because the manual says brace and holding is precisely the wrong thing and nobody in the Empire has told him otherwise in 3 years. I stood there for a long moment and did some arithmetic I did not enjoy. Then a very pleasant voice behind me said, Dorian said, "You're in the way." I moved. He came past me with 3 others, and he was not looking at me when he said it, and he said it in the tone you use to a dog that is lying across a doorway. He was 19. Red and gold coat, immaculate auburn hair that had been dealt with by somebody who was paid to deal with it. Handsome in the way that makes a room easier. He had a genuinely warm smile and he used it constantly, and 2 of the 3 people with him were laughing before he had finished speaking. Dorian Ember, 3rd-year House of the Flame, depth 780, silver ladder 14/312, yield 9%, leak right shoulder, on the recovery 9%. Best figure I had seen all morning. He was genuinely good. He went out into the ring and he was quick and clean and he made it look like nothing, and the crowd at the rail made the noise crowds make. I watched his right shoulder. Every time he recovered from a strike, it opened, and about 1/3 of everything he owned went out of it into the air. He did it 40 times in 6 minutes, and he will do it for the rest of his life, and no instructor in this empire will ever tell him, because no instructor in this empire can see it. 2 more things happened before I got to the due's office, and I mention them because both of them come back. The first was a girl of about 18 in a scholarship coat, mended at both elbows, winning a practice bout against somebody 200 marks deeper than her. She did it by being better. Not stronger, not faster. Better in the specific unglamorous way that means she had thought about the problem in advance and he had not. Lark, 3rd year, no house, depth 380, iron ladder 41/312, she won, and she did not celebrate, and she was out of the yard and pulling a work apron over her coat before the next pair had set up. 3 jobs, I found that out later too. The second was a girl in full Corvin colors coming the other way down the east corridor. 20. Black hair pinned up. The same jaw as the face I had seen in the shaving glass that morning. She saw me from about 30 feet. I watched her decide. It took less than a second, and it was not a difficult decision for her, which is the part I have thought about since. She looked at the wall and then at a door, and then she went past me with her chin level and her eyes forward, and she did not slow down. Her name was Tess, and she was his sister, and she had been in this building the night it happened. I did not know that yet. I only knew that a girl with his face had looked at him and chosen a door. I went to the due's office. The due's office is a window in a wall with a man behind it, and the man behind it is not cruel either. I have thought about this a great deal since. It would be a simpler story if one person in that building had been cruel. As far as I can establish, not one of them was. They were busy. He found the file without being asked. So he had been expecting somebody at that window, which told me how long the letter had been sitting in his tray. A bursar said, "Corvin, yes, the house has discontinued the allowance." A Kestrel said, "I know." A bursar said, "Then you'll know the dormitory is charged separately from tuition. Tuition's paid to the end of the year. The room isn't." A Kestrel said, "How much?" A bursar said, 9 crowns, term arrears and the coming month. A Kestrel said, "By when?" As he looked at a calendar on the wall, and then he did something that I have not forgotten. He did not give me the date the rules allowed him to give me. He gave me 9 days, which was more than he had to, and he did it without any change of expression at all, so that nobody would have to acknowledge that a kindness had happened. A bursar said 9 days. After that, the room goes to a scholarship boy who's on the list for it. That's not a threat, it's a list. A Kestrel said, "Understood, thank you." He looked up when I said that, just for a second. I found out afterwards that the boy had never once come to that window. Everything had been done by letter. So the bursar had spent 2 years writing to Silas Corvin about money. He had never once been thanked for it. Now he had been, and it was somebody else's mouth doing it. I walked out into the colonnade and counted what I had: 3 crowns in a tin, 9 crowns due, 9 days. The 2 days of meals in the tin if I skipped one a day, and after that nothing. I stood in the sun in the most expensive building in the empire, 79 years old, 3 coins and no name. About a week then, before I was sleeping under a bridge, in a body that could not fight off a dog. Then I went to find somewhere quiet because I had a thing to test and I did not want anybody watching me do it. There is a small training yard on the west side that the third years use in the morning and nobody uses after. I waited until the class had filed out. Then I went in and stood in the middle of it in the flat evening light and looked at what they had left behind. It was still there, thinner than in the morning but there, pale motes hanging about, drifting in no particular direction. 50 students worth of waste sitting in the air over a stone yard going quietly to nothing. I put out my hand. I want to describe this properly because it is the single most important thing that has happened to me since I died, and because it hurt more than anything else in this entire account. It came in through the palm. Cold at first, like putting your hand into a river in spring. It came in fast, faster than I expected, because there was nothing in there to slow it down. A night is a jug that is already half full. I was an empty pipe with the ends open. And then it kept coming, and I found out what a hollow body does with power. It does not hold it, not for a heartbeat. It ran through my arm and my chest and my legs looking for somewhere to sit. There was nowhere, so it went round and round like water in a carried bucket, getting hotter. Every part of me it touched began to complain. Loudly, this was not what any of it was for. I had about 9 seconds. I knew that immediately, the way you know a horse is going to bolt. 9 seconds and it would leak out through my skin and be gone, and I would have burned myself for nothing. So I did the only thing available, which is the thing I have done for 60 years. I put it in a cut. There was a stone post at the edge of the yard for tying practice ropes to. I turned side on and struck it with the flat edge of my hand, and I put everything through the wrist and out. The post cracked, not spectacularly. A crack the length of my forearm, top to bottom, with a puff of stone dust. Then I sat down. Draw 41 marks leaked out in 9 sec, yield 96% burn, 62% blackout at 100. My nose was bleeding freely. My right hand had gone numb from the first 2 fingers to the wrist and stayed numb for a little over an hour, and I could not tie a knot with it for 2 days. 41 marks, 41. A first year with a bad measurement carries 200. Bo Tanner carries 430 and cannot use it. I got 41 and it cost me a nosebleed and 2 fingers and about a third of everything I had. 96% of it arrived though. I sat on the stone with my back against the wall and did the sums, and I did them honestly because a man who lies to himself about numbers dies in this trade. 41 marks at 96% delivers about the same as a good silver knight at 9. That is a fact, and it is a very pleasant fact. It is also useless because he can do it 400 times in an afternoon and I can do it once and then lie down. The ceiling was not the draw, the ceiling was the burn. My body was the bottleneck, and my body was 18, malnourished, and had never done a day's proper training in its life. That last part was the first good news I had had since I woke up, because a body can be worked on. I have worked on rather a lot of them. Nobody in this empire trains the way we did before the guilds got hold of it. They train the vessel, fill it, hold it longer, hold more. It works fast and it stops at 18. Everybody now believes that stopping is a law of nature. It is a fact about one method and nothing else. We train the road. The channels that carry it out to the edge. It takes 10 years, it hurts every day, and 1 man in 5 quits with something permanently wrong with him. And it never stops working. I have no vessel at all. There is nothing in me to fill. But the road is still there, and the road can be widened, and nobody has widened one in this empire in 30 years. I sat in that yard until it was dark with a dead nose and a numb hand and made a training plan for a corpse. Then I got to the other problem, which was 9 crowns in 9 days. I could not sell what I did not have. I could not fight for money, because a hollow cannot hold a rank and cannot enter a ranked duel. I could not work because a student caught working outside the school loses his place, and the boy's place was the only thing left that anybody could still take from him. What I had was one thing, and it was not strength, it was a map. I sat in the dark and went through the ground within 30 miles of that building, all of it. The way a rich man goes through his own pockets. It took a long time. I have been in a great many places and I was very tired. The academy hunts in the shallows. 2 hours out, fenced, cleared, restocked, patrolled. Ash and iron monsters and nothing worse, which is not the same as nothing dangerous. Students die there about once every 3 years and the school has a form for that too. The shallows are surveyed every 7 years. The survey marks off the corners that have been worked out so that nobody wastes a training day walking students through empty ground. I was on the survey team in the second one 41 years ago as an escort because I was 22 and it was paid work. There is a corner in the northeast of the shallows past the old cut that has been marked worked out on every survey since. It is not worked out. I watched the man write it down. Getting into that corner means 2 hours of bad ground and a wet crossing. He had 11 more corners to do that week. He was paid by the survey and not by the hour. 41 years. Nobody has been in there since because it is on the map as empty, and nobody walks 2 hours through a marsh to check a map. I sat on the cold stone with my hand not working and I started to laugh again, and this time it came out sounding like a young man's laugh, which was still wrong, and I did not care. 9 crowns. There would be 40 years of monsters in that corner, sitting on top of each other. Every single one of them was made of exactly the thing I needed to borrow. I needed 3 things and I had none of them: a blade, a way out there, a way back. The blade came first, and it came from the armory, which is a low stone building behind the stables with a smell I have known my whole life: oil and iron and old leather. There is one of those in every barracks in the world and they all smell the same. The man who runs it is called Otto. 68, broad, stooped, bald, with gray stubble and 2 fingers missing off his left hand. I did not look at him for long, as I could not afford to. Kestrel said I need a condemned blade, off the broken rack, for cleaning duty. There is no such thing as cleaning duty with a blade, and both of us knew it. He looked at me for about 4 seconds. Then he went to the rack at the back, the one with the bent and cracked and failed steel that gets sold for scrap twice a year, and he came back with a plain arming sword with a hairline crack in the tang and no grip left on it but cord. He put it on the counter. He did not write it in the book. Otto said that's condemned. It'll take about 9 good hits and then it'll go. Kestrel said 9's plenty. He did not ask what for. I have thought about that since. The way out was a wagon. The shallows have a guard post at the gate, and the guard post gets victualled 3 nights a week by a carter who leaves the city at 10 and comes back at 4. A penny to ride on the tail and no questions, because a carter who asks questions gets no pennies. The way back was walking, and that was the part I lied to myself about. The shallows are 2 hours out on the North Road in a shallow valley, and the fence around them is 11 miles long. That fence is the single most reassuring object in the empire. Iron posts, wire watch towers every mile, and a gate with a license office. Cities sleep better for that fence. It is on postcards. It is also nonsense, and every Night Alive knows it is nonsense. The fence is not there to keep monsters in. Monsters do not push on fences. It is there to keep people out, so the school can say that when a student dies it was because he crossed a line. I went over it at the 10th mile at a post where the ground dips. It took me 4 attempts. I want that written down because I have been over that fence in one movement carrying a man on my back. This time I got halfway up, hung there like washing, and came off it into the wet grass. Then I did it again. The fourth time I got a leg over and fell down the other side and lay in the dark for a while, breathing like a bellows, with a condemned sword across my chest. 18 years old, 19 stone lighter than the man in front of him, no conditioning, no sleep, no food to speak of for weeks. Then I got up and started walking northeast because there was nothing else to do. It took me 2 hours and 40 minutes to reach the marsh crossing, and it should have taken 90 minutes. I stopped twice. Not to look at anything, to stand with my hands on my knees and wait for my heart to come back under 100. The old cut is a dry stream bed that runs up the northeast corner. On the survey, it is the boundary. Past it, the map says worked, 7-year cycle, no return. I crossed the marsh in water to the thigh, holding the sword over my head, and it was so cold that my legs stopped reporting anything at all below the knee. And then I came up out of it into the corner that nobody had walked into for 41 years, and I stopped, and I stood in the dark, and I looked at what 41 years of not checking a map had grown. There were 9 of them in the hollow below me. Hounds, that is what the students call them, and it is close enough. Long, slow, 4-legged, made of the dark that moves, big as a pony at the shoulder. And each one had a knot of white light in it under the ribs, slow and turning. 9. As a pack of 9 in a training ground where a pack of 3 would have the school talking for a week. I lay down in the wet grass on my stomach and I watched them for 40 minutes. I want to be extremely clear about what happened next, because everything I have ever done well has happened in exactly this way, and it is not glamorous. I did not attack 9 monsters. 9 would have killed me. 9 would have killed me at 39 in my own body with 2 friends beside me. What I did instead was work, lying on cold ground for 40 minutes on the following problems. Where do they sleep? They sleep against the north bank in a heap because they like stone at their backs. Which one moves first? The second largest. The largest is asleep and does not care. The second largest is ambitious and gets up to look at things. Where can they only come at me one at a time? There is a cleft in the rock at the top of the hollow, 4 feet wide, 11 feet long, with a wall behind it. Which way is the wind? Into my face, which is the only piece of luck I had all night. Then I stood up in the cleft and threw a stone. The second largest came exactly as advertised. It came up the slope fast and low and silent, and I stood in the mouth of the cleft with a condemned sword in a shaking 18-year-old hand, and I let it come because that is the whole art, and it has not changed since I was 20. 9 feet out it opened up. That is what they do before they commit. It is not a warning. It is a wind-up, and everything they have goes forward into it, and for about half a second a hound is putting out more raw power than a silver knight can hold. Which meant, for half a second, the air between us was thick with it. I put out my hand. Draw 38 marks, leaks in 9 sec, burn 22% to 41%. It came in cold at the wrist. It went out hot at the edge. I cut the knot under its ribs, 6 inches, in and out. So the whole thing came apart around the cut like a wet paper sack, and there was a noise like a door closing somewhere underground, and then there was nothing in front of me but a hard, warm lump the size of a fist rolling down the slope. I did not celebrate. I had about 4 seconds. The other 8 were awake. Here is the part I did badly, and I am going to tell it properly, because the boys who only ever hear the good half get killed at 19. I killed the second one clean. As it came into the cleft, it opened up, I took what it gave me and put it through the knot, and it went. The third one did not open up. It came in low and shut, sliding on its front, and there was nothing coming off it at all, and I had nothing in me, and it went through my guard as if I were made of paper. I got the edge into it somewhere behind the shoulder, which is a place that does not matter. It took me off my feet and into the rock wall. My head hit the stone. Something in my left side went, and I have never been entirely sure what. I lay on the floor of the cleft with a monster standing over me in a body with 0 in it, and I have never in my life been that close to being finished. What saved me was that it was angry. An angry hound wastes everything. It reared up to come down on me and it lit up like a house on fire, and every bit of that went into the air 3 feet above my face. I put both hands up. Draw 41 marks leaks in 9 sec yield 96% burn 58% to 71%. I cut it from underneath, through the knot, lying on my back on the stone. It came apart on top of me. Then I got up on the fourth try and I went out of the cleft. The other 6 were already coming up the slope. Here is what saved me, and it was not skill. A hound will not leave the hollow it sleeps in, not for anything. It is the single most useful fact about them, and it is not in any manual, because the men who write manuals kill them in cleared ground where the pack has nowhere to go home to. I had 200 yards to make. I did it in stages. That is the only honest way to describe it. I went 30 yards and turned, because a thing that is chasing you will commit when your back is turned and stall when it is not. Then 30 more. Then I fell over a root, and one of them came in, and I put the condemned blade into its shoulder, which does nothing, and it knocked me down the slope, which saved me about 15 yards. At 140 yards, the second smallest one opened up. I did not need it, and I took it anyway because I have never in my life walked past fuel. Draw 19 marks leaks in 9 sec burn 71% to 79%. I cut its front leg off at the joint. That does not kill one. It does stop it, and a stopped hound in a slope full of moving hounds is a wall for about 4 seconds. I used the 4 seconds. At 200 yards they stopped altogether the way a tide stops. No noise. They stood in a line on the edge of their ground and watched me go, and I walked backwards for another 50 yards because I am not a fool, and then I sat down in the wet grass and shook for a while. I did not go back down for the rest. That is not restraint. I could not have lifted the sword. I came out of the marsh at about 3 in the morning with 3 cores in a bag made out of my own shirt. The walk back to the fence took me 4 hours. That is a fact I would like the young to sit with. 2 hours out, 4 hours back, and the last mile of it done in stages of about 80 paces, sitting down between them on the wet grass in the dark. I went over the fence at the same dipped post. It took me 6 attempts. I lay on the roadside of it for a while, looking at the sky going gray, with a sword I could not lift and a bag of cores I could not sell. Burn 71% peak cores, 3 iron left arm, no response, 2 H40M, because that is the thing about a license. 3 iron cores sold at the guild board with a hunting license and a school stamp are worth about 36 crowns. That is 4 months of dormitory dues. That is a winter coat, a proper one, and food and a bed until. I did not have a license. A student cannot get one until the third-year examination, and the third-year examination was 7 weeks away, and my dues were due in 6 days. So I did what every unlicensed man with something to sell does, which is walk into the wrong part of the city and find a man who does not ask. His shop was behind a chandler's off the market. He weighed all 3 cores twice. On a scale I could see was wrong, and then he looked at my blank collar and my bandaged wrist and my nosebleed and did the arithmetic. The men said 12. Kestrel said they're worth 36. Men said they're worth 36 to a man with a license. What are you worth? I took the 12 crowns. I want to be honest about my state of mind. I was not angry. 12 crowns was 9 crowns of dues and 3 crowns of eating, and I had walked out of a hole in the ground with it, and a week earlier I had been a corpse. But he watched me all the way to the door, and he was not looking at the bag. He was looking at my face and remembering it. An 18-year-old boy in an academy coat, alone, at 5 in the morning, with 3 iron cores and no license and no bodyguard. I have made a great many enemies in my life, and almost all of them announced themselves. That man did not announce anything. He just learned my face for free. I noted it and I filed it and I went back to school. I slept 11 hours and woke up unable to close my left hand. Then I got up in the dark and did the first drill. I should say what that is because it is going to matter more than any monster in this account. Every academy in the Empire teaches the same thing. They call it the vessel. You fill yourself with aura and you hold it longer, and next month you hold a little more. It is safe, it is quick, and it produces a serviceable knight in 18 months. Every guild intake in the Empire runs on it. Every instructor in this building is licensed to teach it. And it stops working when you are 18. That is not a law of nature. Everybody believes it is. It is a fact about one method, and the method was chosen by guilds who needed knights on a schedule 30 years ago, and I was there and I did not stop it because it was working and I was busy. The way we did it before that was different. You do not train the container, you train the road. The channels that carry the power out to the edge of the blade, which are the only part of the system that anybody should ever have cared about. It takes 10 years. It hurts every day. One man in 5 gives it up with something in his shoulder that never comes right, and it never stops. Not at 18, not at 40, not at 70. The road keeps widening for as long as you keep walking down it. I have no vessel. There is nothing in me to fill, and there never will be. But I have channels like everyone else, and mine are the channels of a badly fed boy who has never trained a day, and every inch I widen them is another inch of what I can take out of the air before I burn. So at 4 in the morning, I stood in the dark in a cold room and did 3 things. Cold water to the neck until the breathing settles, a held posture low until the legs go. And then the third one, which has no name and which I will not describe here, and which is the reason one man in 5 stops. It did nothing. It always does nothing. That is what the young cannot stand about it. There is no light, no rush, no feeling of power arriving. There is a boy in a cold room being hurt on purpose in a way that will show up in about 11 weeks. I did it and I put the sword away and I went to breakfast and I could not lift the cup with my left hand. I found Bo Tanner at the demonstration ring at 10. They were using him again. Second years this time, which is worse because a second year hits like a hammer and aims like a drunk. I stood at the rail and watched for 20 minutes and I watched only one thing, which was his hips. 430 marks. Nobody in that ring had more than 300. He had it all and it was going into the ground. Here is what he had been taught out of the manual by 3 separate instructors since he was 15. Set, brace, hold, strike, brace, and hold. The whole empire has been saying it for 30 years. It is on page 9. And when Bo braced, he locked his hips, and when he locked his hips, everything he was holding turned into pressure with nowhere to go. So it went out of him, sideways, into the dirt, every single time. 9/10 of the biggest reserve in the year going into the ground of a training ring for 4 crowns a month. They finished at 11:30. He sat on the edge of the ring afterwards on his own, unwrapping the tape off his hands, and he was bleeding from one ear and pretending he was not. I sat down about 6 feet away and did not look at him. Kestrel said, "Your hips." He did not answer. People do not answer the hollow. There is no rudeness in it. It simply does not occur to anybody that the sound was aimed at them. Kestrel said, "You brace and then you hold. That's what you've been told. When you lock, it comes out of you at the hip, all of it. That's why you're tired at noon and they're not." He turned his head then, slowly. Bo said, "You're the hollow." Kestrel said, "I am." Bo said, "You've got no auras." Kestrel said, "None at all." Bo said, "Then how do you know about my hips?" That is a fair question, and it is the only intelligent thing anybody had said to me in 3 days. Kestrel said, "Because I've watched about 10,000 people do it badly. Stand up." He stood up. I have wondered since why he did. I asked him about it years later and he said, because nobody had told me to do anything all year, they just told me where to stand. It took 40 seconds. I did not teach him a technique. I have nothing to teach a body in 40 seconds, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. I moved his back foot 2 inches and turned it out, that is all. To 2 inches and about 15 degrees so that when he braced, the lock came off the hip and went into the floor through the leg where it belongs. And the power had somewhere to go that was not sideways out of him. Kestrel said, now brace, don't hold it, let it run. A hold's on page 9. Kestrel said, I know what's on page 9, let it run. He got it wrong 4 times. Of course he did. 3 years of doing it the other way is 3 years, and a boy's body argues. The 5th time he did it, I watched about a third of what he was holding stop coming out of him and go where he was pointing instead. He felt it. That is the thing about the road. You cannot see it and you cannot measure it without a stone, but the man doing it feels it arrive and it is unmistakable, and his whole face changed. Bo Tanner leak, both hips on the brace corrected, rear foot 2 inches 15 degrees out, yield 4% to 11%. 11%. In 40 seconds, that is not a miracle, it is a foot. He stood there and worked his hands open and shut. I'll do it again. Kestrel said, no, you'll do it wrong 40 times now and then it'll stick. Do it wrong on your own time. The instructor arrived 9 minutes later because somebody always tells somebody. His name was Instructor Wick. 40s, tired, decent, and outranked in that building by about 200 of his own students. I want to say now that he was one of the only 3 people in the Crown Academy who came out of this year with anything to be proud of. But on that morning he did what he was licensed to do. Oh, Tanner, whose foot is that? Oh, sir. Well, your rear foot is turned out. Square it. Bo squared it, of course he did. Wick looked at me, not unkindly. Oh, did you tell him to do that? Kestrel said, I did. The brace is on page 9 of the curriculum. Set, brace, hold, strike. It's been page 9 for 30 years. Kestrel said, I know, holding is the waist. That's what the hold does. It turns what he's carrying into pressure and pushes it out of his hips into your floor. There was a small crowd by then. There always is. Well, Wick said, Corvin, what's your depth? Kestrel said, 0. Wick said, then you have never in your life felt or a move. And you are standing in my ring telling a 400-mark student that the curriculum is wrong. Kestrel said, yes. I did not argue. I want that noted because I never argue, and it is not humility. It is arithmetic. There is nothing to be won in that ring by talking. Wick had a license, a post, and 30 years of print behind him, and I had a blank collar and a nosebleed. You do not win those with a sentence. You win them by making the thing happen in front of enough people later, when it costs somebody else more than it costs you. So I said yes, and I stood there, and he told me that hollows do not comment on aura theory, and that depth is fixed at 18 and has been since before I was born, and that if I wanted to be useful I could collect the practice blades. I collected the practice blades. That night at the door of the dining hall, Bo Tanner stood in front of me holding half a loaf of bread wrapped in a cloth, which is the most anyone had given the body I was standing in since the day it was measured. Oh, it's from the kitchens. Kestrel said, whose? There's a girl works in there. Maina, she's a hollow too. She said take it to the one on the 3rd floor. I took the bread. Well, the foot thing, is there more of it? Kestrel said yes. It takes about 10 years and it hurts every day and one man in 5 quits with a shoulder that never comes back. Albo said right. Kestrel said 4 in the morning West Yard, cold water first. If you're late I won't wait. He was there at 4. He was there at 4 for the next 600 mornings and he was never once late, and that is the whole reason any of the rest of this happened. When I got back to the room, I took a sheet of paper out of the desk and wrote one name on it. Bo Tanner, Ashfield, nothing else, no heading. I did not know what it was yet either. The challenge came on the 5th day and it came politely, which is how everything in that building came. A second year found me in the East Corridor. He had a folded card on a tray, an actual tray. The Crown Academy has a form for this because of course it does, and the form has been the same for 90 years. A formal exhibition is respectfully offered, dueling court 6th hour. The challenged may name the stake, signed in a good hand Dorian Ember. I stood in the corridor and read it twice, and then I understood what had happened and I was almost impressed. He had not challenged me for beating anybody. He had challenged me because I had corrected an instructor in front of 40 students, and it had gone round the school in a day, and the school had found it funny. That is the thing about a place like that. A hollow being nothing is the natural order. Nobody looks at it. A hollow with an opinion about aura is entertainment. An exhibition is not a ranked duel. It cannot be. A hollow cannot hold a rank. So nothing I did in that court would move a single name on the brass board. That was the joke, and everyone was in on it, and Dorian had been generous enough to phrase the joke on a card. The boy who brought it was about 15. He could not look at me. Kestrel said, "Tell him I accept." Runner said, "And the stake, sir." Sir, 15 years old and better manners than the entire 3rd year. Kestrel said 9 crowns. Oh, he wrote it down, then he stopped and looked up because he thought he had misheard. Runner said 9 crowns. Kestrel said 9. I have been told since that the card went round 3 common rooms before supper, and that the 9 crowns got a bigger laugh than the acceptance. The heir to the House of the Flame challenged by the school's hollow for the price of a month's rent in a border town. Money is not funny to anybody who has ever had to count it. It was extremely funny to them. The dueling court at the Crown Academy seats 400. It was standing at the back by the 6th hour. I want to describe the room properly. You need to see where the fuel was. Stone floor, chalked circle, tiered seating on 3 sides and a gallery on the 4th. Lamps on brackets all the way round. The windows are high and the light goes early. Blunted steel, which is not as reassuring as it sounds. A blunt sword with a silver knight's aura on it will break your arm in 3 places, and everyone in that room had seen it happen. Dorian came out to a proper noise. He deserved it. He was beautiful to watch and he knew it, and he did the thing that good young duelists do, which is to lift the blade and let a little of it show. Red and gold from the guard to the tip in front of 400 people. The gallery loved it. I came out in a coat with a blank collar and a condemned academy blade with cord for a grip, and the noise that made was a different noise, and I have heard it before in cheaper rooms. The instructor of the watch read the terms, exhibition, no rank at stake. Stake of 9 crowns agreed by both parties. First to yield, first to be disarmed, or first to be judged unable. Then he stepped back. Dorian smiled at me. It was a genuinely friendly smile. Don't let it go on, I'll be quick. He meant it kindly. That is the part I have never been able to explain, not to anyone who was not there. He came at me in the first second and I nearly died. I want that stated plainly because the account that went round the school afterwards had me standing still and untouchable, and it was not like that at all. He was fast. 780 marks of aura in a 19-year-old who had been trained since he was 6 by people his father paid properly. He crossed the circle before I had finished thinking about it. I got the blade up because 60 years of doing that does not leave you, and the impact went down my arm and into a shoulder that had been carrying nothing at all for 18 years. I was on the floor. I had no idea how. The court laughed, not cruelly. It is a funny thing when a boy who cannot fight is put on the floor by a boy who can, and I have laughed at it myself. I got up. He put me down again in 9 seconds. The third time I did not get up so much as get to a knee, and I stayed there for a moment with my head down, and I heard somebody in the gallery say, quite audibly, that somebody should stop it. Then I got up and did the only thing left. I ran away for 4 minutes. That is not a figure of speech. I gave ground. I gave ground the way I have given ground perhaps 200 times in my life, and it is the least popular thing a swordsman can do, and it has kept me alive since I was 20. I went backwards round the circle. I kept the chalk line behind my heel. I made him come to me. I did not attack once. I blocked what I had to block badly with a cracked blade, and I took 2 hits on the ribs that I felt for a fortnight, and I watched his right shoulder. Every time he struck, he recovered, and on the recovery the shoulder opened, and a third of everything he was carrying went out of it into the air. Every time the crowd made a noise, he gave them a little more. He flourished. He lit the blade up going into the strike because it looks magnificent, and every one of those cost him about 11 marks that never went anywhere near me. 4 minutes, perhaps 30 strikes. And the lamps at the edge of the court began to look strange. Nobody else could see it. No knight can be taught to see it. That is not modesty. It is simply how it is. It is the only thing about me that is not ordinary. The air in that circle was full. Motes, drifting, slow, hanging in the lamplight like dust in a barn. 4 minutes of a very good silver duelist emptying himself into a stone room with no windows and 400 people packed round it to stop the draft. He had built me a fire and stood in the middle of it. Dorian Ember Silver 780 Ladder 14 spent 412 marks in 4 min, delivered 38 ambient the rest of it. And it is still here. Then he got impatient, because the crowd had started to go quiet, and a boy of 19 cannot bear a crowd going quiet. He set his feet for a finishing strike. He lit the blade from guard to tip. He came. I put out my left hand. Draw 41 marks, leaks in 9 sec, yield 96%, burn 37% to 78%. It came in cold at the wrist. For about 1 second, an 18-year-old boy with nothing in him moved the way I used to move at 40, and everything I know about where a blade is going to be was married to something that could actually get there. One cut, not at him. At the strap. Every academy guard is held on by a leather strap across the inside of the wrist. It is 2 fingers wide, it takes about 11 pounds to cut, and it is the only part of a duelist's kit that nobody looks at because nobody has ever needed to. I cut the strap and his guard came off and the sword went with it. The whole thing had gone about 1.5 feet. It made almost no noise at all. His blade hit the stone floor of the dueling court and skated 11 feet, and the light went out of it on the way, and it stopped against the chalk line at the far side of the circle. Then there was the silence. 400 people, and not one of them had seen anything. That is the thing about that room. They had watched a hollow get knocked down 3 times and run away for 4 minutes, and then the champion's sword was on the floor and nobody could say why. Dorian stood in the middle of the circle looking at his own empty hand. He was not hurt. There was not a mark on him. There never had been any danger of one. I have thought about that a great deal. A cut would have healed in a week. What I did to him took 11 years. The instructor of the watch had to say it twice. Wick said, disarmed, the exhibition is Corvin's. The 4 people in that court knew what they had seen. Wick, who did not look at me at all afterwards, and who went home that night and got a 30-year-old manual off a shelf. A girl in a Mendied scholarship coat halfway up the west tier who had watched my hand and not my sword. A tall, pale girl in a gray-green Holt coat in the gallery who had leaned forward at the 4-minute mark. And Dorian eventually, though it took him until the spring. Nobody else. The rest of them decided within about 90 seconds that his strap had been worn through, and by supper that was simply what had happened, and 2 boys claimed to have seen the fray in it beforehand. I did not correct anybody. I collected 9 crowns from a steward at the side of the court. I put it in my pocket. I walked out through the north door because it was closest. I got 11 feet down the east stairwell. Then my legs went, the way they went at the breach when I was 39, except that at 39 I had a man on either side of me. Burn 78% nosebleed, yes, right arm, no response, left hand, no response. I went down on the 3rd step from the landing and I did not get up. I was there for a little over 2 hours. I could hear them, that is the thing. The court emptied and went past the top of that stair on the way to supper. 400 people, all talking about a strap, and not one of them came down the east stairwell because the east stairwell goes to the laundry and the 3rd floor rooms nobody good lives in. I lay on the stone and bled on my own coat and thought about how easily this could be the end of the whole enterprise. A boy is found on a stair. He has been dead for 2 hours. Nobody is surprised because look at him and there is already a file open on him downstairs with a letter in it. Then somebody came down the stairs at about the 2nd hour and stopped. I could not lift my head. I saw shoes. Good shoes, house shoes, the kind you do not wear to the laundry. They stood there for 4 or 5 seconds, then they went back up. I heard the door at the top of the stair close, and I lay there and worked out from the sound of the tread that it was a woman and about 20 and not in a hurry. They buried me on the 6th day in the rain in front of 11,000 people. I went. Obviously I went. I have been told since that it was a strange thing to do. I have never seen why. The dead have very few pleasures left, and one of them is the accounts. I could barely walk. I got down the hill from the academy by holding railings. Then I stood at the back of the crowd on the north side of the square. My nose was bleeding into a rag that had come out of a bucket in the east corridor, 4 guilds in formation in their coats. The hammer on the left in plain black, the thorn behind them looking like what they are. The watch, 40 men and women who had come down from the frontier on their own money in the worst kit on that square. And the lantern at the front, 300 strong in white and gold, the crest on every shoulder. I stood at the back with the porters and the fishmongers and looked at my own funeral, and I would like to record that I felt almost nothing at all for the first 10 minutes. It was a parade. I have been to a great many parades. Then they carried the sword out on a cushion. Plain grip, plain guard, no maker's mark, somebody had polished it. That was the first thing anybody had done to it in 6 years without being asked. It went past me at about 30 feet. A boy in white gloves carried it, and he had never held a sword in his life. That was the part that got me, not the coffin, the cushion. Vera was at the front. I had known she would be. She was warden of the Crown Academy. I was the founder of the lantern. There is a seating plan for these things. 74. Small, straight-backed, white hair pulled back hard. Dark green warden's coat buttoned to the throat in the rain for 2 hours. She did not cry. She stood the way she has stood since she was 25, and when the sword went past, she looked at it and then she looked at the middle distance, and she got through it exactly the way you would expect from a woman who has buried 300 students' worth of bad news in her career. She had a cane. I had never seen her with a cane. She was not leaning on it. She held it in front of her in both hands like a thing she was carrying for somebody else. She stood on that stone for 2 hours in the rain. She would not lean on it in public. I was about 90 feet away. I could have walked up the side of the crowd. I did not. It was not nobility. I could not think of a single sentence. I have had 400 days since to think of one, and I still have not got it. Pike gave the address. 71 years old, silver-haired, a good black coat, and the platform manner of a man who has been asked to speak at a great many things. He was funny. That is the part people forget about Pike. He was genuinely, warmly funny in a church about a dead man. The crowd laughed twice and did not feel bad about it. He told the story about the well at Harrow Mill, which was true. He told the story about the three of us and the toll bridge, which was true and which he cleaned up correctly. He said that Ansel Kestrel walked into the dark first so that other people did not have to. Everything the lantern is, he said, was built on that one sentence. He touched the gold pin on his coat twice while he was speaking. I noticed it. I have watched that man's hands across a table for 40 years. He touches the pin when he is saying something he has decided to say rather than something he means. He did it when he sold the North contracts. He did it in the year we stopped taking work that did not pay, twice in 9 minutes at my funeral. The second time was when he said the words and the work has not changed. Rook was there. The 24 years old in the black and steel field coat of the hammer with the crow of his house worn plain on the shoulder. He had come straight from somewhere, you can always tell. He looked tired in a way that has nothing to do with sleep. I have seen that face on captains for 60 years. It is always the same face. Too much work, too young, and everyone above him extremely pleased with him. He saw me. I want to be accurate about this. He looked across 60 feet of wet crowd and he found his brother's face and he registered it. There was no doubt at all. Something went across his expression and it was not hatred and it was not contempt. It was the look of a man handed a fourth thing. On a day that already had 3 things in it. Then the lantern's honor party came to attention and he turned back to the ceremony because he was on duty and because it was not the moment and because it never is. He had countersigned that letter 11 days earlier. I have seen his signature on it. It is a fast signature, the signature of a man going through a folder. The ink is a slightly different color from his father's. Different day, different room. He did not read it. I would put money on that now. That is the thing about this family that took me the longest to understand. His father decided, his brother did not read. And between the two of them, on good paper, they killed a boy in a cold room and neither of them was in the building. The last thing happened at the back of the square and I nearly missed it because I was concentrating on staying upright. There was a knot of hammer officers on the corner by the fountain. A courier came up the line and handed something to a man standing slightly apart from the rest of them. He was about 60. Iron gray hair. Plain black coat with no decoration on it at all, in a square full of men wearing everything they owned. I could not see his face and I did not need to. I watched him read the note. It was not about the funeral. Couriers do not bring funeral notes to a funeral. It was the day's business, and the day's business at the Crown Academy the day before had been an exhibition in the dueling court. He read it. He stopped. Then he lifted his head and looked up the hill at the academy for about 4 seconds. I have known that stillness since he was 17. He was the best I ever saw. I broke his sword over my knee in front of 200 men when he was 19, and I have never once regretted the decision and have never once been at peace with it. He put the note in his coat and went back to the ceremony. Nobody around him noticed anything at all. I got back up the hill in a little under an hour, which was twice what it should have been, and I had to sit down twice on the way. Otto was outside the armory with the doors open, doing what he does at the end of the day, which is nothing much with a rag in his hand. I stopped at the bottom of the yard because my legs asked me to. I stood there for a moment, waiting to get them back, and I did what I have done at the end of every long day since I was about 30. It is not a pose. It is where you stand when your back has gone and you do not want to sit down, because sitting down at the wrong moment is how old men stop. Left foot forward, weight off the hip, hand flat on the wall. I looked up and Otto was watching me, not glancing. Watching with the rag stopped in his hand and an expression on his face I could not read at all. I have known him since he was 26. He carried my kit for 11 years and he lost 2 fingers doing it and he has never once asked me for anything. He looked at me for perhaps 3 seconds. An 18-year-old hollow with a blank collar and a bloody nose, standing in a wet yard in the exact way a dead man used to stand. Then he went back to the rag and I went upstairs and neither of us said a word. By the 7th day the school had decided what had happened in the dueling court and it was the strap. I want to record the exact shape of it because I have watched this happen to men all my life and I have never seen it done so fast. On the night itself, 400 people saw a champion disarmed by a hollow and could not explain it. By breakfast, 2 boys in the second year had seen the strap fraying beforehand. By the afternoon, the steward who dresses the court had been asked about the strap twice and had said quite honestly that he could not swear to every strap in the room. By the 7th day, it was simply a fact. Bad kit, rotten luck for Ember, somebody ought to check the straps. Nobody lied. That is what I want understood. Not one person in that building told a lie about it. They had been handed a thing that did not fit the world and they found a shape for it that did and then they stopped thinking because thinking is expensive and the draft is in 7 months. The only change was in what they called me. I had been the hollow, which is not an insult. It is a filing category and it had been the boy's name in that building for 3 years. By the 7th day I was the fluke. That is not much of a promotion. It is one though, and I noted it because I have made a career out of noticing exactly how much ground I have taken. Bo was in the West Yard at 4 in the morning on the 7th, the 8th, and the 9th. He did the cold water badly and the posture worse. He did the 3rd one and had to go and be sick behind the wall and then came back and did it again without being asked. On the 9th morning he said to nobody in particular, "Well, when does it start working?" Kestrel said about 11 weeks. 11 weeks. Kestrel said for the first thing you can measure. The rest of it is years. He thought about that while he got his breath back. "All right," he said and got up and did it again. I have trained in my life perhaps 40 people badly and none well. I have been offered the sons of 6 great houses. I turned all of them down, mostly out of vanity, once out of laziness, and once for a reason I still think was correct. A border boy who is sick behind a wall and comes back is worth all 6 of them. I knew that at 30. It is one of the few things I have always known and it never cost me anything to know because I never did anything about it. Lark came to find me on the 8th day, which surprised me because I had assumed she would take longer. She did not sit down. She stood at the end of the bench with her scholarship coat over her arm and her work apron already on, and she got straight to it, which I have liked about her ever since. "You put your left hand out before the strap went." Kestrel said I did. "Well, why?" Kestrel said balance. "I know." We looked at each other for a moment. Lark said I don't care what it is. I want to be clear about that. I'm not here to work you out and I'm not going to tell anyone because knowing a thing about somebody is worth more than saying it. Kestrel said that's true. Lark said Tanner's stance changed. Everyone thinks he's finally got it. He hasn't. You did something to him in 40 seconds that his instructors haven't done in 3 years. Kestrel said I moved his foot. Lark said then move mine. I looked at her properly for the first time. Lark 3rd year no house depth 380 iron ladder 41/312 yield 8% leak left wrist. At the top of the guard 8% at iron 380 with no money, no house and 3 jobs. There were boys in that year at half her efficiency with 4 instructors each. Kestrel said it's 10 years of work and it hurts every day. I've got a job at 4 and a job at 6 and a job on Sundays. Don't tell me about hurting every day. Kestrel said, all right. And I'm not taking it for free. Kestrel said, I didn't offer it for free. Good, because I've seen what happens to people who take things for nothing off people in this school. She named her price then, and it was not money because she did not have any. She offered me the thing she did have, which was that she worked 3 jobs in 3 parts of the city and heard everything. I have paid a great deal of money over the years for worse. I paid the dues on the 9th day at the window in front of the same man, 9 crowns. He counted it twice because that is his job, and he wrote it in the book, and then he took the stamp out of the drawer and put it on the page. I want to tell you what that sounded like. A wooden handle, a brass die, a felt pad. It makes a small flat knock against the desk. It is the most satisfying noise in the empire when the name on the page is yours. He turned the book round so I could see it. A bursar said, paid to the end of the month. A kestrel said, thank you. A bursar said, you'll want to be thinking about the month after. A kestrel said, I am. He looked at the 12 crowns still in my hand. He did not ask where any of it had come from. I have thought since that he probably had a fair idea and that he had decided a hollow paying his dues was a better outcome for his book than a hollow being asked questions. Dues paid crowns 12 ladder 312/312 depth 012 crowns. The third-year hunting license examination costs 15. That is the whole of it. That is why the poor students in that building never get licensed early, and why the rich ones are licensed at 17 and start logging hunt returns on the brass board a full year before anybody else. 15 crowns and a school stamp. Without it, I could not sell a core legally anywhere in the empire. I could only sell to men in back rooms who weigh on a bad scale and learn your face for free. I was 3 crowns short of the only door out of this. As I went back up to the room that night and I did the thing I had been putting off since the first morning. Before I got to it, I went through the rest of the drawer because I am thorough and because I was putting it off. There was a card in there. Stiff paper, printed columns, the school's stamp in the corner. Last year's trials result. Every student gets one and most of them throw it away. The Silas Corvin trials. Second year course 31/100 stone 0/200 papers 94/100 ground 62/100 total 187/500 standing 312/312. I read it 3 times. 94 on the papers. I went down to the hall the next morning and checked because I did not believe it, and the school posts the part scores on request and a clerk found it for me in about 4 minutes. 94 was second in the entire academy. 3 years, 312 students and 1 girl in the year above him beat him by 2 marks. Second in the school on monster lore, ground survey, contract law, field medicine, and guild history. That is not a boy filling in time. That is somebody who read everything he could get on his own, knowing perfectly well that none of it would ever be worth a penny to him, because the part that pays is the stone, and the stone was always going to be a 0. 31 on the course, which is what you get when you are 18 and thin and nobody has ever trained you. 62 on the ground on his own in a team that would not have helped him. Is 87 crowns worth of academy fees a term, 3 years of instruction from the best faculty in the empire, and the single most useful thing in that building was sitting in a cold room on the 3rd floor writing in a notebook, and not one of them ever went up the stairs. I put the card back in the drawer. Then I sat down at the desk and I opened the notebook. Cheap board covers, 4 years. The first page is dated a week after his 14th birthday, which is the year after his second measuring, and the handwriting on it is a child's. I am going to read one page. I read one page a night in order, and I have never once skipped ahead, and I never will. It is the only discipline I have that is not about fighting. The first page says this: morning, held the second form for 100 count, 91 really, rounded up, won't do that again. Afternoon, ran the hill twice. Evening. Sat with the stone for an hour. Nothing today, same as yesterday, again tomorrow, that is the entire page. 3 exercises honestly reported with the cheating admitted on the first line by a boy of 14 who had nobody checking. Sat with the stone for an hour, an assay stone. Sat with it on his own in a room somewhere in this building trying to make a needle move that had never moved and was never going to. Nothing today. I sat with the book open for a while. I did not weep. I want to be honest about that because I have read accounts by men who claim to have wept over strangers, and I have never believed one of them. I did not know that boy. You cannot grieve someone you have never met, and anyone who says otherwise is performing. What I felt was something worse and much more useful. There was a boy in this building doing the work correctly, on his own. No instruction, 4 years, in a body the Empire had written off. He did the 3 exercises he had been given. They were given to him by people who never once looked at him. He wrote down the truth every night, including the 91. He would have been very good, not with a sword, he had nothing. But he was the only person in the Crown Academy I had yet come across who did the work when nobody was watching, and that is the whole of it, and everything else is decoration. They had all of that in front of them for 4 years. They measured him once and stopped looking. I closed the book. I squared it to the edge of the desk, the way he did. Then I put the sheet of paper with Bo Tanner's name on it into the same drawer, and I sat there in the dark and did the arithmetic properly for the first time. Days to the seal, 1086, 1086 days. I need people, not one prodigy. People in numbers trained the old way, because the thing that is coming out of that hole eats power, and the harder this empire hits it, the bigger it gets. 10 years to make one of them properly. I have 3. I have one name on a piece of paper, a girl who wants to be paid in information, and 12 crowns. I sat and I looked at that for a long time, and there is no version of the sum that works. I have never once found one. I have run it 400 times since, and the answer is always the same, and the answer is that it cannot be done. So I did what I have done my whole life, which is to stop doing the big sum and go and do the next small thing. The next small thing was 15 crowns and a license. They post the examination lists on the board outside the hall on the last day of the month. I went down in the morning with the rest of the 3rd year, and there was a crowd, and I waited until it thinned because there is no point standing in a crowd in this body. The 3rd year hunting license examination. 7 weeks away. 41 names, mine was on it because the school posts every 3rd year automatically. Somebody had put a line through it in pencil. Next to the line in the margin in a clerk's small neat hand was one word, and it was not written unkindly. It was written the way you write a reason on a form, hollow. I stood and looked at that for a while. Behind me somebody was reading the day's paper out to 2 friends. The bit he chose was the council's annual figure. It had gone up again. There was a joke in the piece about it. 40 years of that number going up, printed next to the grain prices. I took the notice down off the board. Nobody stopped me. Nobody was looking. I folded it twice and put it in my coat, and I went back up to the room, and I put it in the drawer with the letter that had 2 signatures on it. Then I went out to the west yard because it was nearly 4, and there was a very large boy from the border standing in the cold water waiting for me.